Hi folks, and thank you for joining our training recipes. Today we're going to focus on our run recipes. This PDF that you can download has our swim, our bike, and our run training recipes. You can see the QR code on the left here, on the right hand side here, sorry. You can download it from there. And you can also download our swim and our bike recipes up on YouTube on our SFuels channel. All right, let's jump into now, as I said, the run recipes, and we're breaking these up into three different types of training sets, if you will. One is your classic aerobic zone 2, think 1 to 4 hour long training session. In the middle is your more shorter duration but higher intensity intervals or tempo, whether that's on the track or on the road, what have you. And then on the right hand side is our hills, whether they're hill repeats or whether they're just a longer elevation run. We'll focus on what is the nutrition for each of these different types of workouts and how you optimize the use of SFuels for maximizing aerobic training adaptions, threshold adaptions, and strength adaptions. So let's jump into it. On the left-hand side is really, like I said, your classic longer run, typically a weekend run, 1 to 4 hours. These are zone 2, slower, but certainly much longer. And these certainly drain and strain the energy stores and our muscle tissues. We want to aim to come into these feeling energized, meaning that we're satisfied from a hunger perspective. And at the same time, we want to come out of these sessions certainly feeling tired, but not exhausted. And we can do that with how we use caffeine, carnitine, and support for replenishment of glycogen in the training session. Okay, so before the session, we want to use some protein and fat to really feel satisfied, but not to downregulate fat oxidation. And the way we do that is with our SFuels Life Bar, taking one of those in the hour before the training session. And then as we get into the training session, we're going to shift to, for the first 2 hours of this training session, we're going to be using our zone 2 plus our primed mixed together, 1 serve of each of those per hour for the first 2 hours. And that will really set up for maximal fat oxidation and aerobic adaptions that happen in these types of training sets. Now, if your training session, your aerobic long run is beyond 2 hours, we guide our athletes then after that first 2 hours is to shift then into our zone 4, which has some carbohydrate to support the ongoing rest of the training session. At that point in the training session, though, both fat oxidation and carbohydrate oxidation is happening very efficiently. Post a session like this, of course, in supporting both the muscles from a recovery, muscle damage perspective, replenishing the glycogen within our muscle cells, we can do this using our SFuels REVIVAL. And typically, athletes would be adding a little bit of fruit on these large sessions after the training session. This is also a good time to add whole foods, whether that is proteins or starches or fats. The second session is really a very different type of a session. These are much shorter, but they are much more high intensity. And stored, glycogen, whether in the liver or the muscle, is certainly going to be drawn upon rapidly on these high intensity intervals, tempo sessions or track workouts. These are typically mixed intensity. The focus here, of course, is to coming into these with the right cognitive focus and mood to embrace the intensity of the session. At the same time, we want to support efficient carbohydrate oxidation at these threshold and higher intensities and get the body really efficient to oxidize carbohydrate and fat as best possible and maximally as possible at these threshold high intensities. And of course, with these types of sessions, when you have these eccentric muscle contractions being done at speed and high intensity, there is higher muscle damage and tissue damage, and we want to certainly recover. So how do we do this? Okay, 30 minutes before the workout, we want to be using our SFuels PRIMED. Both the carnitine and the caffeine will help to regulate up both the cognitive function and also our fat oxidation efficiency for the training session. When we get into the session, for the first 30 minutes, keep drinking the SFuels PRIMED. And really it's after that, in other words, 30 minutes into the training session, we then begin to use our zone 4 carbohydrate-based fueling. And the reason why we've got this 30-minute period where we're not taking carbohydrate, we're just using the SFuels primed, is we want that period of time for the muscle contractions to begin to open up the channels that allow the glucose to come out of the blood into the muscle cells, but most importantly, it does that without insulin. And why that's important is because by doing it without insulin, the movement of the glucose and the fat can happen because there is no insulin that is blunting the fat oxidation efficiency. And that's what we want to happen. We want to have maximal fat oxidation and carbohydrate oxidation happening in these threshold higher intensity sessions. So you want to have that period of time where the muscles are contracting without any form of carbohydrate, not to stimulate an insulin response. And we do that by first just starting the session, the first 30 minutes on SFuels primed, and then we're going to move to our zone 4 carbohydrate-based drink. Post a session like this, again, in supporting muscle tissue when you've been doing this high-intensity type work, there's obviously a greater risk of muscle tissue damage and delayed onset muscle soreness. And this is mostly triggered by the eccentric muscle contractions that are characteristic in running. And we do this by supporting our revival shake post-run, and that consists of both ketones, a fairly clinical dose of glutamine, and whey protein isolate. Those three things together will really facilitate rapid replenishment of glycogen and support of muscle tissue damage. The third session here is really about using hills, whether it's repeat hills or even a longer run that has quite a significant amount of elevation change, whether that's up or down or both. And these strength building sessions, they place significant strain not just on the energy stores obviously, but also on muscle tissue. So for sessions like this where you have this elevation change, and particularly where it's quite aggressive, the focus really needs to be on both being cognitive ready, in the right mood for a session like this, at the same time thinking about how the body is going to be using different energy stores to support that very changing nature of high intensity and lower intensity as you come into and out of different elevation changes. And clearly all of that has a quite significant impact on muscle tissue damage, and we're going to talk about recovery in a second. So coming into a session like this, taking our SFuels primed will just help to, again, really set the cognitive focus to embrace the session and really prime the fat oxidation efficiency in the muscle cells as we get into the training set itself. The first 2 hours, again, and even if it's a 2-hour session overall, the first hour then should be just on the zone 2 product. If it's a greater than 2-hour session, I would encourage you to have the full 2 hours on our zone 2. But if it's further than that and it has a lot of elevation change, the first 2 hours zone 2 and then shift to our zone 4 fueling drink. This is really, again, to set up maximal fat oxidation efficiency and aerobic adaptions from a training session like this. But if it is that extended duration, like beyond 2 hours, we would encourage to add our zone 4 into it. You're going to be extremely efficient by 2 hours in at oxidizing both fat and carbohydrate. But it's just by adding that carbohydrate, it's going to support you coming out of the session, certainly in a tired state, but not in an exhausted state. Post a session like this, again, a lot of strain on the muscle tissue, and using again the revival product to support that recovery is important. The only nuance here I would say is if the nature of the elevation change is quite aggressive, whereby it's steep ascents and descents, the strain is stronger or harder on the muscle tissue, we do encourage our athletes to think about 2 serves of the revival in some form or preference of dairy that they mix into a shake for their run. Okay, so folks, if you do want to download the recipes for the swim and the bike and the run, you can do that off this QR code. Up on that same QR code, you'll also find our racing recipes, whether that's for an ultra marathon, half full marathon, or for a 70.3 or a full Ironman. It's all up there. Download it, take a look at it. Thanks very much for joining. Also, go and have a listen to our bike and our swim series on training recipes. Thanks again. We'll catch up soon.